This is Articulating,
an independent school podcast. Hello, everybody. Hope you're having a great day. It is part 3, the last part of the Equity and AI in Education series brought to you by Articulating Podcast. We are pre-recorded. However, we are live in the comments. So Middle States Association is happy to answer any AI questions that you might have. My name is Sam Osborne, executive producer for Articulating Podcast, as well as co-host alongside my dear friend Gina Parker Collins, who is the founder of RISE, Resources in Independent School Education. Want to give a shout out to Amber Berry, Vice President of AI and Strategy for Middle States Association. Also want to shout out Christian Talbot, MSA's president, and Morgan Mifflin, MSA's AI project manager. So this is the final part. It's all about parents. Do you have your paper and pens ready? You will want to take notes. I promise you it's going to be a great episode. Share it with family, share it with friends, share it with your school community. Thank you so much for watching, and please enjoy. So, Amber, do you think it is critical for parents today to be AI literate, or can that just be the kids' thing?
Oh, it's 1,000% important for every parent to be AI literate, and the time is now. I say that because if we had to reduce our roles to one job, if we have one job we're responsible for, it's to keep our kids safe. And there's no way that you can keep your kids safe hoping that your school or your kid will figure it out, because it's way too new. There's too many aspects. And so I need parents to tune in and to figure out what this means and all the implications and all the ways that generative AI is in their child's life. And it's not enough to just assume, if I limit screen time or things like that, that somehow generative AI is not something that they have access to, because it absolutely is part of video games now, and it's part of all kinds of arenas in their lives. And as we know, we're not always with our children. And so when we figure it out first, we can have an informed conversation with our kids, with their caregivers, with friends, playdate parents about what is and is not okay in our houses, and how we can have some appropriate boundaries for kids.
I think that one of the reasons we wanted to chat with you, we're seeing a lot of articles popping up, kids being disciplined by their schools, suspended, expelled because of misuse of AI, kids with very severe mental health issues because of their relationship with AI. Could you just share some of those risks, those dangers that might be happening under a parent's roof?
Absolutely. I mean, I think part of the issue is that, how many times do parents maybe sign off on a school handbook and not read it? It's really important to understand everything that you are putting your child into. You go to a bounce place with your kid, the trampoline park. I have younger kids, 5 and 7, and I still take a minute to read, what are the risks of me being in this space with my children? It's easy to want to just rush through and assume we're all in it for the best, right? So I'm sure it'll work out. But being an informed consumer, being an informed parent is so important. And so that handbook might be 80 pages, but there's probably quite a bit about what the school expects in terms of what they define as cheating and not cheating, what's okay help and not okay help. And then having that conversation with your child in an age appropriate way. Again, I have young children, but I still talk to them about what I'm reading and what consequences are, behaviors they might observe, and then what do they do if they're in that circumstance. And so I really want parents to feel empowered that you've been given a lot of information, and it's important to distill that and make sure you're protecting your kids. It's back to keeping our kids safe. I will say that not all schools are publishing very clear policies on generative AI. So it's something to look for. Look in your handbook and see if your school has that policy yet. And if they don't, I would ask where they are, because if a classroom teacher has the latitude to have a policy you don't know about, you can't help your child make good decisions. The fact is, we don't know all of the dangers yet. When it comes to teaching your child how to drive, there are some very clear things. We've been doing this for a long time one way, and we know how to prepare them. We know how to help them learn how to look behind corners and anticipate animals and children and fast stops and highways. But this is a new landscape, and we don't know all of the dangers yet. So it's about teaching children and teaching ourselves to have a disposition of some sort of caution as they proceed.
Yeah. So we are talking to primarily an independent school audience. Uh, in addition to the work that you're doing now, you've been that educator in independent schools. Can you describe what the day-to-day of an independent school parent is like with regards to, maybe their responsibilities, their school interactions, and how AI could maybe even help them?
I think one thing that every independent school parent would be looking for is time. What is my time
Mhm.
and opportunity to connect to my child? Taking advantage of those minutes in the car, taking advantage of those minutes at home that seem to get eaten up by all the activities and the homework and trying to keep those social connections alive. And so parents who capture time back by leveraging generative AI to help in their own work lives, to help in their workflows, you will
Mhm.
find that you have more time to take a deep breath, to cuddle with your kid. I'm still, I have a new reader in kindergarten. So being able
Oh,
to sit
nice.
and read with him instead
Mhm.
of trying to manage all the things, I can only do that when my, email deck is cleared out on time or I've gotten my work off of my desk on time. And so I think for the independent school parent, it's looking for opportunities to connect your kids to yourself and to others was probably one of the primary things they're trying to do, and not always in such a structured way. All the
Mhm.
activities our kids do are highly structured, and they still need some free time to hang out and to be with others. And I think that it steps into a tricky line. I'm not suggesting that parents should use generative AI necessarily to try to foster connections. So, yep, generative AI
Mhm.
is part of Roblox. I know that's a popular game for young
Yes,
kids, and
yes.
generative AI is going to be part of a lot of the applications our kids use. So, I'm not suggesting you use that more, but I am suggesting that when you become AI literate about where that's going to show up, it would be really helpful. And then, as you are taking the time to, I think many parents wear the hat of being a full-time chauffeur in addition to all of their other jobs. How do you just navigate being human, that principle that my company has, that we're human led and AI informed in that
Mm.
order? If
Mhm.
AI has freed up my time to be connected to my kid, I'm not using AI to get closer to my kid. I'm using the time I have back to get closer to my kid and to do all those human things that we want to be doing, but sometimes overschedule a bit.
Great.
Amen. Let's make this happen for
Mhm.
parents. It's important to note before we go any further, this portion of the series is going to be Amber talking to our audience from a personal capacity, not as a representative of Middle State, as Middle State is school focused. What are some ways that parents could leverage AI to advocate for their students and their students' many different academic needs?
So, as parents start to experiment, and I know that some good guidance is spend 10 hours playing around and using generative AI, and don't feel like you have to approach it for some specific purpose. Truly explore. And if you're doing that and you're becoming AI literate yourself, I think you're really quickly going to see ways that you could be supporting your child or thinking about things in a whole new way that you didn't realize was possible. Part of that comes from, our own capacities to support our children sometimes get maxed out pretty quickly. While I spent 15 years as an educator and teaching kids in classrooms, I've never been an expert in early childhood education. So I'm really not in a position to skillfully teach my kindergartner how to read, but there are some applications I can use to support his literacy skills in a beginner way that match what my child's school is doing in the classroom. And so there's so many resources I could just start to point parents to, but I would say one of them, we have the CEO of AI for Education. Her name is Amanda Bickerstaff, and she's on our rail advisory board at my company. Her organization is really school oriented, a lot for students, a lot for educators, but there is this parent side that comes out that I think parents would find really valuable. And one of those is she had a webinar last fall about students with disabilities. And I'm seeing more
Mm.
and more keynotes, workshops, schools leaning into how could generative AI help my child who learns differently? And so when we think about that, we think about homework plans, like how could generative AI support you through the homework hour, creating study
Mm.
plans for your child and supplements for your children based on what they're getting from school, and absolutely with generative AI tutors. And so just from personal experience, my 7-year-old comes home with his math work every day. I take a picture of it. And then I use generative AI to create an answer key. This just saves me time. I absolutely could do the
Ooh.
problems myself, but it's done in 15 seconds instead of in the time it would take me. I check his work when it's done quickly back and forth. We do it together. He knows I'm using generative AI and what that means, that I didn't do the work and it did it for me to help him. And if there's a discrepancy, we work on that. But also, I pay attention to where he's struggling. And so if there's a particular section that he's struggling with, I generate more questions just like it. So generative AI is modeling after, what his teacher would provide in the classroom. And I don't torture him right then and there, but throughout the week, a couple of those problems come back and he's really shoring up his skills over time. I'm not an expert math teacher for second grade, but I've saved myself. Of course, I could do it all myself. I can do a lot of things myself, but it's
Mm.
an amazing experience to do it quickly, to know that I'm on track and modeling like after the program that he's actually doing. I've looked up his textbook and the chapter he's in and made review guides. Like it's just really neat to be able to do that when I'm not a teacher with a textbook myself. And look, I'm still writing notes to my teacher, my child's teacher. He got a little emotional about this section, or he was really struggling with this, and this was not an independent solve. Those sorts of things are still part of the equation. We're not losing that human touch and communication back to school about what my child needs. So that's just like a quick example of how you might start to dip into how could this support me and support my child. But also, the more a parent is going to learn, the more they're going to think about how they might advocate for their child to the school, to consider how generative AI might support their child, or to ask if this is an appropriate way to allow generative AI to support my child. I do have one of the generative AI tutors downloaded. I have a subscription to it. We haven't tried it yet. I'm a little bit nervous to put it in front of my child. We'll do it side by side. But Conmigo is a popular choice
Mm.
that parents use. It's not giving kids answers. It's when they're stuck, they're getting some guidance. But that is the plan, that I'll start introducing that this winter and experiment with it. And if I don't feel like it's a great fit for my kid, I'll move on. But I'll also keep communicating with the school that this is an area of practice or experimentation in our house, and to let our school know how it's going.
I mean, first of all, this really goes right back to one of the benefits that I see in AI, which is really being able to keep up with your student. And for many parents, kids will come home with homework and it's embarrassing, particularly math. I don't know what that stuff is, right? So how could I even be of support to you? So to know that there are generative AI tutors like Con Amigo that are available is powerful. That's exciting.
You're
So
talking about, Gina, you're talking about like learning differences. I'm thinking also about language differences, like when
mm,
your student comes home and, English might not be your first language. You don't know
right.
the
That's it.
Odyssey.
That's it.
Yeah.
Yeah, for
You're
sure.
touching on something really important there, because I do have folks in my life who are vision impaired. And there have been so many technology tools over the past couple of decades that have revolutionized their access to the world. But
Hmm.
apparently, generative AI is it's this whole new level of being able to describe a picture in real time and like describe
Hmm.
what you are not seeing, like as you're in the space and not later. Like that
Hmm.
lag is starting to decrease, and so folks are
Yeah.
able to be in the moment. Like it makes me a little bit emotional to think about just how the playing field might be leveled for folks who always maybe thought that they were going to exist a few steps behind and always trying to catch up and compensate, but that generative AI could really support folks who, and again, it's the same for hearing impaired. Like there's just a lot of developments that are much more speedy and more nimble than they were.
So with that liberation, we can't just automatically think that there's a level of trust that schools will have that, you know, we haven't over generative AI tutored our kids or given them the easy way out. How are families building a level of trust that we understand what generative AI is for and we're using it with a sense of efficiency and morality? Like, how do you build that trust with schools, particularly if they don't even have that, that line item in the school guidebook, right? It's there's nothing there to give me any guardrails.
It's all about open lines of communication. And if
Hmm.
independent schools are incredible at many
Yeah.
things, but one thing, I think that's what it is. And so anytime a parent, in my role as a division head, came to me to share something, anything unrelated to technology, just, I want you to know this. I always
Mhm.
thank them so profusely, even when it was incredibly hard, even when the consequences to follow were devastating on like a personal note.
Mhm.
I can't do anything with information I don't have. So the best thing that a family can give to a school is knowledge. It's
Right.
the
Right.
ability to make great decisions. So this is where I would recommend that parents approach it perhaps with a spirit of curiosity and not condemnation,
Mhm.
right? But
Yes. Yep.
asking questions, because
Yes.
chances are, even if your school doesn't have a published policy, trust me, they've talked about it. They probably just
Mhm.
haven't reached consensus or aren't entirely sure what the safest course of action is yet. And through that process of inquiry, I recommend trying to get connected to the early adopters in the school. If you could say, what's a teacher who's really leaning into this just because I'm curious and I want to keep up and this is amazing. I want to tell other families what's
Mhm.
happening.
Mhm.
If you could get
Mhm.
connected to that teacher who's decided to experiment in this way and that way and have conversations with them, this is how the momentum grows. Bring your fellow
Yeah.
parents into it. You think I'm using generative AI for homework and not, shooting a text to a buddy and saying, hey, homework tonight was super hard. You might want to look at this before you sit down with your kid. So I think building that positive communication among parents directly with the school, spirit of
Mhm.
curiosity, what's happening,
Mhm.
share what you're doing, share what you're unlocking, share what you're reading, what your questions are. Schools are
But
very,
Amber,
very, very willing to engage.
so trust goes both ways, right? So what is the conversation that parents might need to have with their schools as far as their school's use of AI with their students?
I would say that one thing parents may want to explore a little bit, if it's possible, is like, well, what are other schools doing too? If you have access, if you have kids in more than one school, I would ask in both institutions kind of like what's going on and
Mm.
what's your approach. If we look at some of the statistics, I want to say it's around 86% of parents believe that their kids need AI literacy skills. So parents
Mm.
get it. They may not be AI literate themselves, but they know their kids need this. I think the red flags, if I'm putting my parent hat on, are my school is like unwilling to engage on this topic. So a lack of
Hmm.
communication, saying, oh, like we're just not dealing with that, that would alarm me. I would want to know that there is some planning, there's process, there are dedicated people who are, is it an AI committee? Is it a group of technology plus academic leaders working together? I would want to know that there is a plan coming, even if they're not ready to publish. Here's where we stand and
Mm.
draw a line in the sand today. But that has to come. The first thing is just to be curious and ask. And then, whether there's some activism that you want to engage in about, hey, listen, this is what I learned from this online course that I took that teaches boundaries and safety for students. Is this something that's part of the digital citizenship curriculum for our school? We already know that our kids are learning things
Mm.
like password safety and all kinds of, your digital footprint. And so, in what ways are AI literacy starting to build in, even among young kids? And I know
Mhm.
elementary schools are definitely lagging in teacher engagement and what generative AI looks like, for good reason, because many platforms are for older students. And when we think about like chat bots are not appropriate for elementary school students. But yeah, I think that we're going to get to a tipping point of teachers who are getting it and parents who are demanding it.
So, on that note, if we were to take that question to the third stakeholder, would you say that curiosity is the way to go with our kids and developing a level of trust between us and our children to be using generative AI in the proper way, if particularly if we can't depend on the policy of the school to be ready to do that? What is our role? How do we as parents build trust with our kids with their use of generative AI?
There is
Mhm.
so much room for parents to make their own decisions on how they raise their children.
Yeah.
And there are, Surgeon General guidelines for health that parents do or do not decide to follow. There are
Mhm.
ratings for TV shows and video games that some parents subscribe to, and others, they make their own decisions and they're allowed to. And so I would say generative AI, proceed with caution and be very involved in what your kids are doing. Show them what you're doing. I show
Mhm.
my children what I'm doing for work, what I'm doing for other teachers, what I'm doing for school leaders, what I'm doing actively in their own school district to stay involved and to be an advocate for what this learning is going to look like here in my home state. And so in the same way, I would not allow my child to explore generative AI on their own behind closed doors. And yes, I'm
Mhm,
talking about a younger child, but even an older
mhm,
child, there is a lot of risk out there. There's a reason that schools haven't found it obvious to make a decision and publish it broadly on day one. So this is a complicated topic and parents need to be part of it. I would
mhm.
think of it a little bit like a read aloud book. And again, maybe you did that when your kids were younger, but in my family, like we still read books aloud to each other and articles. And so like that family sharing, that opening it up and doing it together is critical.
Because our podcast is focused on equity, I think we also need to recognize that there's a literacy gap between the haves and have nots, right?
Mm,
So if you have, access to a device 24/7 and you have Wi-Fi and you have the means to engage in AI, like AI that you subscribe to and pay for versus, the, open AI type offerings. I think that one thing I'm thinking about, like when you're talking about all of these tools and everything, is that yes, there's a literacy gap for those who speak English and don't. There's a literacy gap for between the parent and the student. I think I'm wondering about the ethics behind the literacy gap between families with means and families without means in independent schools. Do you have a
mm,
stance on that?
It's less a stance and more
mm.
you naming it is half the problem. I think sometimes we make assumptions, and 2020 was a great example of us making an assumption that
Yep.
everyone had a stable internet connection at home that just wasn't accurate. And that is going to be problematic as we think to the future, that if families don't have access to the internet in your community, that's an intervention that needs to take place. And I would ask
Mm,
families to advocate for that. I absolutely had a student who, disclosed, unfortunately the library closes at a certain time and I'm not always done with my homework. And I didn't realize that student's stable internet access meant going to a public space with restrictions. And so there was only so much the child could do. And so I became that kid's advocate. But if I didn't know, there would be no starting place. And so families need to know that they need to take up space and be
that's
sure
right.
that they're advocating for that.
Absolutely.
I would ask if it's possible for your child to get a paid subscription to an application, even as an experiment. Say, listen, I have a feeling this isn't necessarily going to be something you offer to everyone, but can we experiment with this and see how it helps? And maybe this is something that we do provide for families who couldn't have it in the future. You might get a no, but if you don't ask, you won't know. And so I would just recommend that families really lean into that conversation. It's possible that there's school accounts that have already been set up that they don't know about, and that could really unlock to another level. And you're right to name, and this is what school leaders need to think about and parents need to advocate for, that if no one's having these conversations, if no one's checking that there is access
Mhm.
for all, then the gap will get wider. And that's exactly what we don't want.
Yes, and this is a perfect example of how the most marginalized among us can really create and shift culture for everyone.
Yeah.
The fact that you ask, you know, if I can get it, then surely everyone can benefit from this opportunity as well. So, asking and advocating for your child can be a benefit to the entire community. And most of our
Yeah.
schools are really focused on a culture of yes, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, I'm sure
Mm-hmm.
whatever you need, I mean, back in the day, it was like, we need a laptop, right? And before you knew it, everybody was getting
Great.
access to laptops. Yeah, no, that's important. I think I have an idea of where generative IA is the most helpful in this admissions process, but I want to hear from you. How do you think parents can leverage generative AI for that?
All right, I'm going to give 30 seconds of AI 101 before I answer. And that's to
Okay, great.
say, I've been taught to think about AI in three different capacities. I did a mini MBA last winter at Section School in AI for Business. And the way they presented this is the first way to think about it, the basic way to think about generative AI is as a creator. That's tier one. It can just brainstorm a big list for you, very open ended. The second way to
Mhm,
think about it is as an assistant, and that's like help you cut out the drudge work, like reply to this email or draft, to
mhm,
respond to something for you quickly, to revise it, to condense something long into something short. And then the third way, the most complex way, is to treat generative AI like a strategist, a thought partner, to ask questions, to mock out a conversation, things like that. So hopefully you see where I'm going here. I think you could use all three types, all three personas of generative AI to help in the process. To think expansively about, what are all the possible interview questions that someone could be asked, and describe the school, describe the location, describe the demographics you've learned, and you'll get a great list of interview questions to prep. Now, will the school ask all of those questions? No. And half the battle in application and that kind of process is feeling prepared, feeling rehearsed, feeling like you have confidence going in, and that you've reflected a lot about yourself and your values, and you're able to communicate those. So we go back to, if English is not your first language, in what ways could you find language accessible by practicing in advance? That second, about being able to condense a lot of information. I'm sure the emails are coming in from the schools that you're looking at, and there's so much information, and there's brochures, and the website is extensive. So being able to copy or share a website with a platform and say, help me distill this down. Help me capture the spirit of the school. Maybe the school did a great job. It's captured in the mission, the vision. But if it's not, this is a great tool to help you take all these blog posts and articles that the school is doing, and to start to have some talking points that you could use forward when you're in that process. And then lastly, I would say the strategist is truly do a mock interview and get feedback. Ask generative AI to be the interviewer at the independent school that you're working to join as a community, and to play the role of interviewing you as a parent, to play the role of interviewing your child. And it's not that, again, generative AI is going to copy the exact process and then everyone's going to nail it. It's that you are going to use the tool to your advantage, to build your confidence, to build your preparation, and to hone in your ability to communicate the why this community, why now, and why am I the best choice?
Wow. Thank you. Some tips there.
Yes, thank you so much. I mean, I just can't even imagine what the school search process would have been like if this was a tool that we could have leveraged for myself, for your kids, Gina. I mean, even thinking about, just understanding like what school actually aligns with your personal philosophies and mission. I could totally see myself, stating what my priorities are for my family. And then when it comes down to the 2 or 3 schools I have to decide between, and making that difficult decision.
You can literally do that. Share your notes from the 3 schools. Here's my pros list, my cons list. Take a picture of it or type it in, and then say, make an argument for what the choice is and why. Justify it. And you may not go off of what generative AI said is the first choice and why, but it'll just present it in a different way than you're thinking about it. And it's neutral, right? It's not you inserting whatever feeling you got about the brand of the school or the neighborhood of the school. And it'll just take the notes that you generated and give you some feedback on what it sees as just one more point that you could take into making that really hard decision.
Do you think there's a little bit of a slippery slope there, in the sense that, we're asking generative, I don't know why I'm having such a hard time getting generative Gen AI. There we go. Thank you, Sam. With Gen AI becoming too dependent upon the feedback. I mean, I know we're putting information in, but I'm hoping that there's still a certain level of critical thinking that a parent will have, even though they've given them such great information to provide them with the responses that they need. Can you talk a little bit about that, being a little bit more discerning about the information that you get and making it personal to your experience so that it's more human-led, right?
Yes,
At the end
absolutely.
Of the day.
Absolutely. Generative AI, the way that you interact with it is more if we could personify it, more in a human interaction. I've used the analogy of treat it like an intern. And just this weekend, I'm starting to reimagine, treat it like a new colleague who's a little forgetful. So someone you want to work with and want to collaborate with, but you recognize they're new.
So then you're rude to them and you threaten them and you tell them, watch your back. And yeah,
I'm afraid to be rude to Gen AI. I'm telling you right now. I do not.
You better not.
I do not play with that. Okay.
Do not.
Okay.
It'll be rude right back.
That's just me. But okay. time?
Yeah, I think if we think of it like a new colleague, you know that they're an expert, that they're qualified to be in their role, but you also know that they're not ready yet for you to rely on them wholly. They need support from you. You need to be
Right.
interacting in that relationship. And so that disposition of a new colleague is a little bit more of like, oh, I'm like their de facto mentor to help them get up to speed. If you always have that disposition as you interact with Gen AI, that cautious, oh, I should anticipate that there might be mistakes in this report, not because
Right.
you're not qualified, but because you're new and there's some things I know you don't know. Another great way of thinking about how you start with this is use generative AI for things that you actually are an expert in to start. So you can point out the
Mm.
flaws and be like,
Okay,
that is
right.
not
Yeah.
the best way to do
Yes.
that recipe,
Yes.
right? Like, and
Right.
when you start to look at it from that position that you are superior in some ways, and yet I would never be able to come up with, 100 ways to give a gift to my 5-year-old. Like that would take so much time. And I wouldn't think of all the things that generative AI is going to think of. So there's ways that it's helpful, but I'm the parent who knows my kid. And so in this gift
Right.
giving season, I'm going to make the ultimate choice and not just go with the first 5 that I looked up at the first glance. It's also a back and forth. So if you are consuming AI like the internet, like I put in a search, it said this and I'm going with it, that's not the right way. And the
Right.
chance that you're going to fall into biases and hallucinations and misinformation so
Mm.
high, so high. So you're right. It's good for us to remember that there is a critical eye you need to have toward interacting with this. It's a helpful tool, but it is not a perfect tool.
I'd love to know if you have any advice for families, when they do become parents at these schools, just how to manage their activities.
I feel like there are so many, maybe not AI tools, but definitely technology tools that are great kind of schedulers that can really help you look out ahead and avoid the pitfalls of being overscheduled, exhausted, and just kind of at a breaking point in terms of all the things. I know that the concept of more is so common in independent schools. And they often have a new offering, it seems like every week, every month, but they don't sunset anything. So there's still already a full month ahead. And now there's something that sounds great that you would love to do. So I would lean into perhaps looking into some tools to just help you stay organized and, again, to clear some things off of your own calendar so that you have more time or your children have more time. But I don't have a specific one, I think, that would, gosh, if there is one, I want it. One that really
Wouldn't it
helps
be
with
great? Like
schedules and
it
activities.
could be an alert that's saying that's too much. That's too much, right? Like you're doing too much. Do you think that there is time that will come upon us soon where we can create generative AI to meet our needs, right? Like to create an app that would, as lay people, we don't have to be a coder to be able to do that. Do you think generative?
Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, no, I do. I think the moment is here. I just think I'm not the one who knows exactly how you do it.
Well, I
I
know I'm
do
not,
think
but
already there are ways to really do that. One example would be like the LLM that you put in a large language model, all the information about a particular topic, and then that becomes the expert in that topic. So you're not constantly looking up and referencing into it. It's pulling from a curated database you've created. I feel like that kind of structure of like if this was an app that's about managing time, that it would be able to pull from like, these are the things that you have said you prioritize in your schedule. So this does or does not really align with that, or, maybe try next week.
There is the possibility that AI can aid in cheating, but also could potentially mask a potential learning disability or a greater learning
mm,
challenge. Do you
mhm,
think there are
mm.
guardrails that parents can set up, or something that they can identify in their use of AI when they say, okay, I think we have something we need to navigate here?
That's a great question. It goes back to communication, that when you are intervening for your child, and like you have the experience of your own child, and if you're not an educator yourself, we don't always know what's normal, especially not with our first kid, right? Like I have no idea if this is how all kids at this age handle this or react to this, or homework takes how many minutes. And so I think it goes back to the communication of sharing with the school, this is how much help I'm providing. And that goes with or without generative AI, right? So
Mhm.
if you've hired a math tutor for your child, I would communicate that with the math teacher so they realize you have and they understand why you have. I would have a conversation with them about, do you think the friction my child's having, the emotion they're having, the amount of time it's taking, is this normal? Are their grades in the range that that they should be in for their development and for them to move on to the next level? So those sorts of
Mhm.
questions have to stay. Introducing more supports for your child, not disclosing that they're getting support, is a problem. And I don't know that all independent schools have figured this out for any kind of help, whether it's a
Mhm.
tutor, a parent, a homework helper, or working with your friends on an assignment. Defining exactly where your child should be is tricky. That's ideally where assessments come in. Well-designed assessments should show where your child is. So if the homework is getting a ton of assist, but they're
Mhm.
unable to do that on the assessment, that gap should speak volumes to the teacher and to you as a parent. So that's the ideal scenario. So I would say telling the teacher exactly like what this is looking like at home and how many times did they use that inquiry on generative AI in terms of tutoring. I do know there are some schools that have they've partnered with ed tech organizations that have generative AI platforms to support teachers and students. And some of the perks of using these platforms, every time a child uses the generative AI tutor in the platform, the teacher's getting a record of it. So now when you see the same question asked 17 times, you know that you didn't teach it clearly enough. And if you're seeing one child using it to a level that you didn't expect, you know that there is a problem there and you can intervene and start the conversation of how to support. So you're asking a good question about masking. I wonder about the role of writing in our future. What is it? We all
Mm.
know that communication is critical, and what kind of communication will be privileged. I'm grateful that generative AI is going to help folks become better writers than they were. And so the bottom of writers in our society should be able to rise up and be able to communicate at a much easier level for them in a way that helps them be heard. At the same time, does it matter that maybe writing skills aren't leveling up with this improvement in communication? If there's a gap between what someone's able to do independently, does that matter? Does it matter for our jobs? Does it matter as adults? Does it matter in
Mm.
our child development? It's going to have implications on the brain and development. So I wonder what that's going to look like, but it is way too soon for me to anticipate how we're going to figure that out and how we're going to figure out how to teach kids to use a tool, but also decide to ask good questions about, why do we ask kids to write? What do they need to know? To what level do we think everyone needs to get to at a baseline? And does that adjust a little bit? Because generative AI is here to help for the future.
That is deep. How are you using AI throughout your personal daily life? Like, how is it assisting you?
I don't think I have enough time to give all of the ways that I use generative AI daily, but I'll
Oh,
give a
Well, how about your
couple.
top 3 favorite ones?
Ooh, okay. All
let's.
right. My number one favorite is how I host my email, and it's an application called Superhuman. And I'm
Mhm.
obsessed with it because it has generative AI features, but also just cool tech features that work for me. It organizes my email in such an easy way. And so I'm able to zero my work inbox. I'm not there yet on my personal inbox, but my work inbox is zero a lot. I'm able to respond to everything I need to and divide things up so calendar invitations aren't cluttered with to-do lists. I really love that approach. It's embedded that I have generative AI to reply to people. And so I can just by a keystroke say, reply to this, give me a first draft. It can be rewritten in my voice because I've used Superhuman for 4 years. It knows exactly how many
Mm.
exclamation points I put in my emails and that I always sign with best. And so I just love these ways that I'm whipping through things that matter to my job, right? How I communicate with school leaders around the world matters. And so I want it to be at a high level. I want it to be clear. I want to be quick and high touch. At the same time, my job is not to answer emails, it's to design learning experiences and professional experiences for people and to really help them and to teach them. And so getting the email communication to be fast so I can spend more time designing experiences has been remarkable. And that is a hack that I brought into my life as a full-time teacher where my inbox was 3 times worse. And so it was so amazing to be able to be organized in my communication and spend more time in classrooms with kids and observing and supporting teachers than I was behind my desk responding to email. The second one I use a lot, if you are someone who is constantly on kind of virtual meetings, then I highly recommend Spinach. It is
Mm.
incredible. It's a virtual AI project manager. It takes notes in meetings, it records the meeting. There's lots of other brands that do this. I love Spinach because it's corresponds with project management software. My company uses Project Monday, so it can make work tickets out of the meeting. It can take a basic back and forth conversation and make a project plan out of it. And occasionally, I don't really know where my team landed after discussing a topic for a long time. And so I use it. I read the transcript again, but I also use it for like, where did we land on what the risks are to this decision? Where did we land on where the cons are? It's just an amazing tool to analyze your meetings. I've even used it as a personal coach. What was my demeanor like in that meeting? I'll be honest, I was feeling defensive. And did that translate? Did you see it in my face? Did you hear it in my tone of voice? And so I give myself a little coaching, and it turns out I do talk a lot. I always get that feedback. I get that feedback at home too. So that's two of them. And the third one, I guess, every single night, I no longer read directions on boxes. It's like, what's the air fryer time and temp for salmon? That's like my number one. I use it as a joke, but I'm not kidding. I choose not to memorize it. I think it's 375, but I choose not to memorize it. And that frees up my brain space to do other things. But I love that I can, you can put anything in an air fryer, by the way. So
anything.
Anything.
I like the way you worded it, that it enables you to do the things that you are supposed to do, because I sometimes feel some guilt about my reliance on AI, but it truly, I was not put on this earth to go through every single email, text.
There's a few other features I forgot about Superhuman that remind me of that. Like, one thing is when you get an email, but like really a bunch of people need eyes on it, and you can just tag those people at the bottom to track the thread. They don't really need to be copied, but you're not spending the time like trying to organize, like give a summary of what this conversation is, or keep forwarding them like, hey, FYI, this is where the conversation's going. And then you can comment back and forth with each other as a team, like, hey, I really think this should be the decision. Do you all agree? Great. And then you go ahead and respond to it and you're done, right? Like it's cutting out the meetings and the back and forth, and you're not pulling out of email. Like some companies have Slack and WhatsApp and other ways they communicate, but doing it right in the inbox keeps it nice and tight. It's amazing.
Amber, thank you so much. Oh my goodness. This was an amazing interview with you. You are a gift. And this is all from in your personal parental capacity. So, I mean, you're an expert here too, I must say. So we're really grateful for your time.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the time.
If you enjoyed listening to this discussion, please pass it on to a friend. And don't forget to hit subscribe and follow us on Instagram at our parent organization at 4RISE. That's the number 4, RIISE. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you in 2 weeks.